Why did they laugh the moment she stepped inside? The gun store was a hive of bravado, of raised voices and overpolished egos, the kind of place where men puffed their chests as if weight alone could bend steel. But when Rachel entered, the noise sharpened. Laughter cut through the air before she even reached the counter. "Hey lady, the coffee shop," across the street, a clerk sneered, leaning on glass smeared with fingerprints. His smirk was sharp but hollow. Another voice followed, mocking, sharper still. "Canvas bag, clueless face. She thinks this is a vintage boutique." Rachel did not answer, not with words. Her fingers tapped lightly against the glass counter, just once, just enough. The room didn't notice at first, not until she said the words that froze the clerk's grin mid-breath. "Show me the MRA Ghost Edition, the unreleased version." For a moment, nothing. Then silence fell, subtle but heavy, like a pressure drop before a storm. The Ghost Edition wasn't a name that belonged in this room. It belonged to a place none of them had been, to whispers from classified files, to men who never spoke their missions out loud. But Rachel stood there, in faded sneakers and a worn green windbreaker, saying the name as if she had handled it before. Eyes turned, heads tilted. The laughter that had been so easy just seconds ago began to stumble over itself. They didn't know what to do with her calm. The air smelled of gun oil and testosterone, of smoke curling from the back range. It was supposed to be a stage for dominance, a ring for ego. Yet Rachel moved like a shadow, slipping through jeers and mocking eyes as if she had heard it all before. A man in a leather vest, arms marked with skulls and flames, blocked her path to the rifle case. His voice carried over the range's gunfire. "You're in the way, sweetheart. Real customers here." He gestured toward her canvas backpack. "What's in there? Knitting supplies." The laughter swelled again, crueler this time, almost desperate. She met his eyes, and though her face did not shift, something in the weight of her gaze made him falter. His smirk lost balance. He muttered under his breath, shrugged, but the damage was done. Rachel stepped past him, silent. Every step carried with it the strange quiet of someone who didn't need to announce themselves. She wasn't playing their game, and that unsettled them more than anger ever could. "Lost sweetheart," the clerk pressed on, smirk snapping back like a mask. "Yoga class is next door. We sell heavy metal here." A man in a backwards baseball cap let out a sharp whistle. "Look at those shoes. Look at that bag. Wrong shop, wrong life." Even a woman with a ponytail, pistol in hand like it was a fashion piece, shook her head with pity. "You've wandered into a man's arena, darling." But Rachel only lifted her eyes to the sniper rifles locked behind glass. Her stride slowed, precise, like someone crossing an invisible rope no one else could see. The crowd began to feel it. Not respect, not yet, but unease. As though her silence carried weight they couldn't explain. When the clerk leaned forward again, clicking a pen against the counter, his sarcasm spilled. "So, what do you want? Something shiny to impress your friends." Her answer cut sharper than any boast. "Show me the Ghost Edition." It shattered their rhythm. The man in the backwards cap choked on his drink. The woman with the pistol stopped mid-laugh. An old shooter in the corner stiffened, his scarred hands curling. "That model, never been sold outside," the clerk stammered. His words withered before they could finish. Rachel's finger tapped the glass again. "So, yes or no?" The room tilted, eyes shifted. The manager, buzzcut and heavy-set, stepped from the back. His silence spoke louder than anyone else's mockery. He opened a vault, pulled out a rifle none of them had ever seen in daylight. Sleek, matte black, a scope that could slice through fog. When the rifle touched the counter, even the laughter stopped pretending. But mockery is a stubborn thing. It clung to the edges. A wiry teenager pushed forward, his vape pen dangling from his lips. "She doesn't even know what that is. Look at those shoes. She can't afford the cleaning kit." His friends howled behind him, eager for the courage that mob laughter lends. Rachel turned her head just slightly, her lips curving into the faintest trace of a smile. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't coldness either. It was acknowledgement, a silence so exact it pierced his bravado. The boy's laughter stuttered, then broke. Chad the clerk tried again, tried to sound in control. "Fine, you know the name, but you can't hold it. That thing weighs 10 kilos. A rifle was tossed toward her, thoughtless, reckless. She caught it one-handed, smooth, effortless. Not a tremor in her arm, not a dip in her wrist. The store fell into a silence thick enough to hear breathing. Then came the challenge: disassemble it. 8 seconds later, the weapon lay in perfect order on the glass, piece by piece. A puzzle solved in silence. Murmurs replaced mockery. Some stepped closer, unsure. A man clapped slowly, sarcasm hiding his unease. "Nice trick. YouTube tutorial." His smile faltered as her hands moved again, reassembling, not once looking up. But then she paused, pulled out something ordinary, a paper clip. She pressed it against the receiver, head tilted, eyes sharp. "This bolt," she said softly, 3 millimeters loose. In sub-zero it veers off target." The mercenary in the corner swore under his breath. "How the hell?" His eyes widened. Her answer was colder than the steel in her hands. "Because I used it, Sun La Peak. Level 7 winds, 400 meters, moving target." A grenade of silence detonated in the room. The rifles gleamed under fluorescent lights. The laughter that had filled the air minutes earlier had nowhere to hide. It bled out through shifting feet, nervous glances. Rachel said nothing more. She didn't need to. The emblem on her backpack, half faded, shaped like a viper's head, caught the eyes of those who dared to look closer. Recognition flared, whispered, denied, then whispered again. But before the room could settle, the manager gestured toward the range. "Coin, 150 meters. No one ever hit it. Show us." The crowd parted. Rachel walked out, rifle in hand, gravel crunching under worn sneakers. The coin hung in the sun like a dare. 2 seconds of aim. A single shot. Metal split clean in half. The silence after was not empty. It was full of fear, of awe, of something none of them could name. Rachel set the rifle back down exactly where it had been. She wiped her hands with a cloth that bore an old stain, dark and permanent, like memory itself. Not one of them laughed this time. Not one of them dared. But something none of them knew, something not yet spoken, still waited at the edge of that silence. A truth heavier than any bullet. Because Rachel had not come here to impress them. She hadn't come to win. She had come for peace. And peace for her had never lasted long. Who would be foolish enough to laugh after that shot? The coin, split clean, still dangled in two halves on its string. Sunlight caught its edges, flickering like a dying signal. But the crowd didn't cheer. They didn't clap. The silence was too deep, too raw. It pressed against their chests like a weight. Rachel stepped back from the line, rifle lowered, her face unreadable. She didn't smirk, didn't raise her chin in triumph. Pride wasn't her language. Neither was gloating. She walked back across the gravel like the shot hadn't even happened, like the bullet had left her body and taken with it all the noise in the world. The man with the baseball cap, the one who'd sworn he'd lick the floor if she hit it, couldn't find his words. His drink slipped from his hand, the can hissing and rolling under a rack of handguns. He bent down, fumbling, trying to pretend nothing had happened, but his flushed face betrayed him. Others shifted uncomfortably, their shoulders slumping, laughter gone brittle. Only the mercenary, scarred knuckles white around his own rifle, stared without blinking. His eyes weren't mocking anymore. They were searching, remembering. But bravado is stubborn. A woman in a pink hoodie, her phone raised to capture what she hoped would be Rachel's failure, broke the silence. "One shot," she said too loudly, trying to push confidence into her trembling voice. "That doesn't mean anything, probably just luck." Her screen glowed, recording. A crowd desperate for someone to puncture the stillness leaned toward her words, clinging to them like a lifeline. Rachel didn't answer. She didn't even look. Instead, she unzipped her backpack and pulled out a small cloth, worn and frayed at the edges. She began to wipe her hands, slow and deliberate, as though erasing fingerprints no one else could see. The cloth bore a faint, dark stain, irregular, old, impossible to wash out. The young woman's voice faltered. Her phone dipped lower. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to delete the video then and there. The gunsmith, the older man with hands stained from years of oil, stepped forward. His voice was gravel, low and almost reverent. "I've seen that before," he murmured. "That cloth, that grip, Ghost Viper." The name rippled through the air like electricity. Some frowned, others shook their heads. Myths, rumors, stories for soldiers at the edge of sanity. But then his eyes locked on Rachel's hands. He saw the scar across her knuckles, shaped like an arrow. He whispered what no one else dared. "She's ghost number 17. Gasps rippled, murmurs spread. Eyes widened. For the first time that day, fear outweighed arrogance. Rachel finally spoke, her voice quiet, calm, but sharp enough to carve through the tension. "I came here for peace, but if I must, I still shoot with precision from 400 meters." Her words weren't a threat, they were a fact, delivered without heat, without ego, and because of that they landed heavier than any shouted warning. The crowd recoiled, subtle, like prey sensing a predator. Even the manager's jaw tightened. He'd unlocked a weapon he had no right to show. That should have been the end, but insecurity never dies quietly. A man in a sleek jacket, cufflinks glinting, leaned toward the counter. His voice was smooth, practiced, but it dripped with condescension. "You're really letting her touch that rifle? Look at her shoes. She couldn't even afford the ammunition." His laugh was a blade, cutting shallow but meant to sting. Rachel paused mid-motion. She turned her head slightly, met his eyes for less than a breath, and then adjusted the scope on the rifle with a precise twist of her fingers. The click was soft, final. The man's laugh dried in his throat. The room felt smaller. The clerk, Chad, desperate to claw back authority, barked, "Hold on. You can't just, where's your ID? No registration, no firing. Those are the rules." Rachel slipped a hand into her backpack and drew out a card, worn, blank except for a faded emblem and a string of numbers. No name, no photo, just proof of something none of them were supposed to understand. Chad snorted, lifting it for the others to see. "A library card. What is this, some kind of joke?" The manager's voice cut in, brittle with nerves. "No documents, no clearance, she's done." Rachel took the card back without a word. She slid it into her bag, zipped it shut, and turned toward the door. The room's tension shifted. Mockery flickered back to life like a dying bulb, weaker now, but still dangerous. A man in a faded army cap, belly hanging over his belt, stepped forward with a laugh that sounded more like a plea. "Hey, don't walk away. You think you're some hotshot." He jabbed a finger at her pack. "Bet that thing's full of cheap makeup and dreams." This time the laughter didn't ring with confidence. It was nervous, forced, as though they all knew they were crossing a line. Rachel stopped. Her hand rested on the door handle. She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. No anger, no fire, just weight. A mirror of every mistake he'd ever made. Then she reached into her bag, slowly, deliberately. When her hand emerged, it held a small metal case. She set it on the counter. The click of steel against glass silenced the room like a gunshot. The man's finger dropped. The crowd shifted back, eyes glued to the case etched with a faint, unfamiliar symbol. And then the door swung open. A man in a black suit and dark glasses stepped inside. His presence alone shifted the air, like the room had tilted. He moved with precision, each step measured, as if even his silence had been trained. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the rifles. His eyes, hidden but felt, went straight to Rachel. He stopped in front of her, lowered his head, and spoke words no one else could understand. "Confirmation code 870. Your next mission begins tonight." And then the gesture. A hand pressed lightly to his chest, lowered in a motion that only a select few would recognize. The ghost viper salute, reserved for shadows, for names erased from records. The crowd froze. Chad's clipboard slipped from his grip, clattering against the floor. Someone's phone buzzed in their pocket, loud in the silence. The woman with the fake pistol pressed herself against the wall, clutching her purse as though it could shield her. Rachel didn't flinch, didn't breathe differently. She simply turned, adjusted her bag, and prepared to follow. A woman with red-dyed hair tried to save face. "So what? You think you're some secret agent now? This isn't a movie." Her laugh was brittle, breaking under its own weight. Rachel paused in the doorway. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a single bullet casing, old and polished, and set it gently on the counter beside the metal case. The sound was small, but it landed like a verdict. The woman's keychain slipped from her trembling hand. It clattered to the floor, lost. Rachel stepped out into the fatting daylight. The man in the black suit followed like a shadow. Behind them, no one moved. No one spoke. They just stared at the door, waiting for it to explain the unexplainable. But the story didn't end when the door closed. In fact, that was only the beginning. Because consequences ripple, and for those who mocked her, the ripples were just starting to roll back toward shore. What happens when silence doesn't leave the room? When Rachel walked out, the air she left behind clung to the walls. People breathed, but not fully. They spoke, but their voices were too thin. The shop wasn't just quiet, it was altered. Chad bent down, scooping his clipboard off the floor. His fingers trembled, betraying him. The smirk that had been his shield only hours earlier was gone. He looked around for backup, but the crowd wasn't with him anymore. They weren't mocking her absence. They were staring at the memory of her presence. The manager leaned on the counter, his buzz cut catching the fluorescent light. His jaw worked silently, words trapped somewhere deep in his throat. He'd seen arrogance before, seen it collapse, but this was different. This wasn't collapse, it was exposure. The woman with the fake pistol grabbed her purse, heels clicking far too quickly across the floor. She didn't wait for her friends. She didn't even look at them. She pushed the door open, almost stumbling onto the gravel, like escape was the only thing that mattered. The man with the baseball cap, the one who'd sworn he'd mop the floor with his tongue, stared at the broken coin on the ground. He bent down, picked up half of it and slipped it into his pocket as if hiding the evidence would rewrite the story. His drink had already bled across the tiles, leaving a sticky patch under his shoes. He muttered to his buddies, but no one laughed, not even them. The mercenary was the only one who hadn't moved. He stood in the same spot, his rifle still leaning against his leg. His scarred knuckles flexed. He wasn't mocking. He wasn't joking. He was remembering Sun La Peak, level 7 winds. He had been there. He hadn't taken the shot. He hadn't believed it was possible, until now. The gunsmith turned away from the counter. He shuffled to his workbench, pulled a rifle from the rack, and laid it down. His thick glasses caught the light as he ran his hands across the metal. Slowly, carefully, he tested the bolt. His jaw tightened. 3 millimeters loose, exactly as she'd said. He adjusted it with trembling fingers, not because he didn't know how, but because her voice still echoed in his head. Calm, precise, certain. "She's ghost number 17. He hadn't meant to say it aloud earlier, but now it was carved into him. The room remained tense until the sun outside dipped lower, the shadows stretching across the gravel. Only then did people begin to leave, their steps faster than usual, their eyes avoiding one another. None of them wanted to admit what they'd felt. None of them wanted to speak the truth. They had mocked someone who didn't just carry weapons, she was a weapon. But silence doesn't stay contained, it spills. That night the man in the baseball cap uploaded his recording. He thought he could twist it. He thought he could own the narrative. "Thrift store girl tries to act tough," the caption read. The video caught traction instantly. Views climbed, comments poured in. But the internet saw more than he wanted them to. They saw her calm, her silence, the shot that split the coin, the way the laughter drained from the room. By dawn, the comments had turned. He wasn't praised for exposing her. He was condemned for mocking her. Thousands of strangers called him out, some with anger, some with shame, some with words that cut deeper than the jeers he'd once thrown. His sponsors noticed. By noon, the message arrived, terminated. Conduct unbecoming. He deleted the video, but the internet doesn't forget. Mirrors of it spread across feeds, forums, back channels he couldn't touch. His follower count bled out like a wound. His bravado drained with it. The woman with the fake pistol tried her own spin. Over brunch, she told the story as if she had been in control the whole time, laughing at the memory of that poor girl who wandered in. But her friends had seen the video too. Their silence cut deeper than Rachel's had. Invitations stopped coming. Group chats went quiet when she typed. By the next week, she realized the truth. She had mocked a shadow, and now she was alone in the light. Chad didn't fare better. The owner called him that evening. The call was short, cold, his voice flat. Effective immediately, you're done. Disrespecting classified personnel, you think that doesn't have consequences. Chad tried to argue, tried to explain he hadn't known, but the line had already gone dead. He packed his things that night, head down. His goatee, once worn like a badge, now felt like a costume he couldn't take off fast enough. The gunsmith worked late, later than he had in years. He recalibrated every rifle in the shop. 3 more carried the same flaw Rachel had spotted with only a glance. He corrected each one, his hand steady, his breath uneven. When the store was finally empty, he pulled out a drawer, slid the worn card Rachel had shown them inside, and closed it gently. Not as a trophy, not as proof, but as a reminder. Legends don't need names. The mercenary left without a word. He walked into the night, rifle slung over his shoulder, memories clawing at his chest. He ordered whiskey at a bar, sat in the dim corner, and told the bartender a story he hadn't told in years. "I saw her once," he whispered. "Or someone like her. Took a shot no man alive should have been able to take. And now," he trailed off, staring into his glass. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. The rumor spread like smoke. Not in headlines, not in public, but in whispers. Forums lit up, screenshots surfaced. Ghost Viper, Arrow, number 17, a name without a name. A sniper who existed only in fragments. In the shop itself, the atmosphere changed. The next day, customers came in, but their tone was different. Voices lower, bravado muted. No one laughed too loudly. No one mocked too freely. They all felt it, even if they couldn't explain it. The room had been marked. Rachel didn't return. She didn't need to. Her silence had done the work. Her absence carried more weight than their presence ever could. And still, none of them knew the whole truth. None of them knew why she had come that day, or what the man in the black suit had whispered as he saluted her. None of them knew what mission waited in the night. But Rachel knew. And peace, the one thing she'd asked for, had already slipped through her fingers again. Because for people like her, peace is never more than borrowed time. Why didn't she look back? The shop door closed behind her, but Rachel didn't turn her head, not even once. Gravel crunched beneath her sneakers as she crossed the lot. The black SUV waited at the edge, windows tinted, engine humming low like a predator's breath. The man in the black suit held the rear door open, his expression unreadable behind those dark lenses. Rachel slid inside without hesitation, her canvas backpack resting across her lap like it had always belonged there. The door shut with a dull thud. The vehicle pulled away, smooth, quiet, already fading into dusk. Inside, silence pressed heavier than in the gun store. The leather seats smelled faintly of polish, the kind of detail that didn't matter to soldiers but mattered to men in suits who never touched the front lines. The man in the black suit sat across from her, posture straight, his hands folded neatly on his knee. He didn't speak right away. He studied her, or maybe waited for her to speak first. She didn't. Finally, he broke the quiet. His voice was calm, level, but carried the weight of someone who had memorized the art of restraint. Code 870, you know what that means. Rachel's gaze remained fixed on the dark window. City lights slid by in blurred streaks. Her reflection in the glass was faint, almost ghost-like. She whispered not to him, not even to herself, but to the silence. I asked for peace. The man adjusted his glasses, unflinching. Peace isn't assigned, it's granted, temporarily. Her lips curved, not into a smile, not into bitterness, but into something in between. A recognition. She had known the truth long before he said it. The car turned onto a quieter road. Streetlights gave way to empty stretches of highway. The world outside blurred further, until the SUV seemed suspended in a tunnel of motion. Rachel shifted her backpack. The fabric was fraying near the seams. Her fingers brushed the faded Viper emblem stitched into it, tracing its edges like a scar. She hadn't sewn it there. It had been given, earned, marked. The man across from her leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. You're not forgotten, not by us, not by those who matter. Tonight you'll have coordinates. The rest will unfold. She finally looked at him, her eyes calm but hollow, like a flame that had burned too long. Coordinates are easy, living with them after is. He didn't respond, maybe because he had no answer, maybe because he didn't need to. The hum of the engine filled the silence again. Rachel leaned her head back against the seat. For a moment her eyes closed. Not sleep, soldiers like her didn't sleep in moving cars, but memory. Voices came back, not the mocking laughter of the gun shop. Those were easy to brush off. These voices were older, sharper, commanders shouting orders, comrades shouting her name, wind whipping across Sun La Peak, the taste of snow in her lungs, the trigger cold beneath her finger, the silence after the shot. Her hand twitched, the scar across her knuckles itched, ghost number 17. Arrow, she had been called many things, none of them her name. The man in the suit finally broke the quiet again. You performed at the shop exactly as intended. Rachel's eyes opened slowly, her tone sharpened. Intended. He nodded. Visibility was necessary to remind the world you exist. Her jaw tightened. That wasn't visibility, that was theater. He didn't flinch. Theater has its place. Legends require reminders. Rachel looked away, her gaze finding the passing dark. Theater. Legends. They used words like that because they never had to sit with the aftermath. They never had to carry the weight of a coin split in half, the silence of a room that didn't know what it was mocking until it was too late. The SUV slowed, turned again, then rolled into an underground entrance, the lights overhead casting long shadows across concrete walls. The vehicle came to a stop. The man opened his door, stepped out, and gestured. Rachel slung her backpack over her shoulder, stepped onto the cold floor, and followed him down a corridor that smelled faintly of dust and steel. The sound of her sneakers echoed against the walls. They entered a dim room. A table waited at the center. On it, a folder thick, heavy, no name on the cover, only numbers. The man placed his hand on it. This is what you're here for, but before you open it, I need to hear you say it. Are you in? Rachel stared at the folder. Her hands didn't move. Her silence stretched so long that even the humming light above seemed to hesitate. Finally she whispered, "What choice do I have?" The man exhaled, not quite relief, not quite regret. "Then it begins tonight." Rachel sat. The chair was cold against her back. She opened the folder slowly, each page heavier than the last. Coordinates, names, maps, photos. A pattern she recognized instantly, not random, not scattered, a net. Her breath caught in her throat. She forced it out evenly. This isn't reconnaissance. The man's silence confirmed it. Rachel pressed her palm flat against the table. Her fingers spread slightly, as if bracing herself against a wave. She closed the folder. "I'll do it," she said quietly, "but don't confuse action with loyalty." The man didn't argue, he only nodded once. You'll leave at 200. Gear will be provided. He stood, adjusted his tie, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused. His voice softened just enough to carry something human. You never really leave, Rachel. That's the truth. The door shut behind him. Rachel sat alone in the dim light, the folder in front of her, the clock ticking somewhere unseen. Her hand drifted back to the scar on her knuckles. Her thoughts flickered between the laughter at the gun store and the silence after her shot, between the weight of the past and the pull of what was waiting outside. She closed her eyes again. For a moment, she tried to imagine what peace might feel like if it ever lasted more than an hour. She couldn't. Because for people like Rachel, peace was never given. It was borrowed, and someone always came to collect. Why did she keep touching the scar? Hours before departure, Rachel sat alone in the dim quarters assigned to her. The concrete walls pressed in like old memories. A single lamp burned over a metal desk, throwing shadows across the folder she had closed but not moved. The scar on her knuckles, thin and jagged in the shape of an arrow, itched as though the skin remembered more than her mind wanted to. She flexed her hand. The scar whitened, then faded. She whispered to herself, "You should have let it heal." But she hadn't. She never had. Some scars were meant to remain visible. The backpack lay on the floor beside her chair, its straps frayed, the Viper emblem faded but still sharp enough to catch the light. She reached down, slid it into her lap, and unzipped it. Inside, little that anyone else would find remarkable, a cloth stained with something dark and old, a folded map, edges worn thin, a casing polished smooth from years of being carried. She placed the casing on the desk. The bullet that had never been fired. Her hand lingered on it longer than she intended. The clock ticked from the far wall, 0112, less than an hour until departure. She stood, crossing to the mirror fixed above a small sink. The glass was cracked across one corner, her reflection fractured slightly, as if reminding her she was never whole. She splashed cold water on her face, let it drip from her chin. The water didn't wash the weariness. It never did. Her eyes, brown and steady, stared back. They were the only part of her she trusted anymore. They didn't lie. They showed the fatigue, the weight, the loneliness she carried even when her shoulders looked straight. The door opened without a knock. A figure stepped inside, not the man in the suit, but another operative. Younger, taller, his uniform crisp. He carried a sealed case in his hands. "Gear drop," he said simply, setting it on the desk. He hesitated a fraction of a second before leaving, his eyes flicking to the scar on her hand. Recognition. Fear. He didn't say a word. The door shut again. Rachel sat back down. The case was matte black, edges lined with coated locks. She keyed them in with muscle memory she hadn't realized was still intact. Click. The lid lifted. Inside lay a rifle, dismantled, each piece resting in velvet compartments. Sleek. Modern. More advanced than the Ghost edition she'd held at the shop. Alongside it, an earpiece, a small encrypted tablet, a folded set of orders. She reached for the rifle first. Not to assemble, not yet. To feel the weight of each part. Her fingers moved like they were tracing words she'd forgotten how to read but somehow still understood. The bolt. The scope. The barrel. She breathed slower as she touched each one, like the weapon was a language that had once been her native tongue. Her hands moved on their own. In seconds the rifle sat assembled on the desk. Perfect. Ready. Deadly. She set it aside. The tablet blinked to life with a green pulse. Coordinates glowed on the screen, pulsing faintly on a map. The target zone, remote, sparse, far from cities but not empty, structures marked, heat signatures noted. Rachel's jaw clenched. This wasn't reconnaissance. This wasn't even clean execution. This was messy, complex, civilians within proximity. The kind of mission that left shadows longer than the men who ordered it ever admitted. She shut the tablet, harder than she meant to. Her breath came sharper. The casing sat on the desk, gleaming faintly. She picked it up, rolled it between her fingers, pressed it into her palm until the edges dug into her skin. A casing that had once belonged to a bullet fired by someone else. She had carried it ever since, a reminder. Not of triumph, not of pride, of the cost. Her thoughts wandered. Snow, Sun-La Peak. The wind howling so hard it felt like knives. Her hands numb, her vision blurred by frost. She had been told the shot was impossible, that no one could do it. She had taken it anyway. 400 meters. A moving target. The silence after still rang in her ears. But it wasn't the shot that haunted her. It was what came after. The faces she never saw again. The comrades who hadn't made it down the mountain. The orders she had followed without hesitation, only to realize too late that survival doesn't always mean winning. Her scar had come that night, not from the rifle, from the rock she struck as she fell forward, breathless after the shot landed. An accident but permanent. A mark shaped like the arrow they had branded her with. She set the casing back down, slower this time. Her voice was little more than a whisper. Peace doesn't exist for people like me, just pauses. The clock ticked, 01:47. She assembled her pack quickly, cloth folded, casing tucked away. Map slid into the side pocket. She hesitated over the cloth again, holding it longer than she should have, her thumb tracing the old stain. Then she tucked it deep. Boots replaced sneakers, gloves pulled on, windbreaker zipped high to her neck. She looked once more in the mirror. The cracked reflection stared back, fractured but unflinching. A knock came at the door, firm, measured. She didn't need to ask who it was. She slung the pack over her shoulder, lifted the rifle, and opened the door. The man in the suit stood waiting, his glasses still in place though it was long past midnight. He nodded once. Transport ready. Rachel stepped into the hall. The sound of her boots on concrete echoed. The rifle rested against her shoulder like an old companion. They walked without speaking down another corridor into the garage where a second black SUV idled. The driver didn't look at them. Didn't need to. Orders ran deeper than curiosity here. Rachel slid inside, setting the rifle across her knees. The man followed, closing the door. As the engine hummed, she looked out at the night. The city was asleep. Lights glowed in apartment windows, soft, ordinary, families inside, children dreaming, couples arguing quietly, lives untouched by coordinates and dossiers. She envied them fiercely, briefly, then she turned away. The road ahead stretched into darkness. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Every mission carried the same weight, the same truth. It was never really about the target. It was about her silence, about what she could endure that others could not. The man beside her spoke, only once as they drove. "Remember, Rachel, you're not forgotten." She didn't answer. She pressed her palm against the scar on her hand. Her silence said everything. Because some missions begin before the first shot is fired, and the hardest battles are fought inside the silence. How do you prepare for a mission you never wanted? Rachel didn't ask. She never asked. Questions were luxuries, and luxuries got people killed. Instead, she rode in silence, the SUV gliding through the empty night roads, headlights cutting tunnels of pale light through the dark. The city had fallen away hours ago. Now, fields stretched endless on either side, flat and bare, the moonlight silvering the landscape. The driver never spoke. The man in the black suit sat across from her, posture straight, eyes hidden behind glass that reflected nothing. Rachel's rifle lay across her knees, fully assembled, silent and waiting. Her gloved fingers brushed against the barrel, not in affection but in ritual. The rifle was not a friend. It was not an enemy either. It was a mirror. It showed her who she was in the silence between breaths. The SUV slowed as the dirt road narrowed. Ahead, only shadows of broken structures rose against the horizon, the mission zone. Sparse, half-abandoned, dangerous precisely because of its emptiness. The vehicle stopped. The driver killed the engine. No words, just stillness. Rachel exhaled once, steady and slow. She slid the backpack over her shoulder, cradled the rifle in both hands, and stepped out into the night. Gravel crunched beneath her boots. The cold air carried the scent of earth and rust, like something long forgotten had been left to rot. The man in the suit stepped beside her, his voice low, measured. Two targets, both connected, both inside the compound, no collateral. Rachel's eyes flicked toward him, steady and unblinking. And if collateral moves into my line? His pause was longer than it should have been. Collateral doesn't exist if you do your job. She didn't answer. She turned away, her silence sharper than any retort. The compound loomed ahead, a cluster of decaying buildings, metal siding rusted, windows shattered. Faint light flickered from within, generators humming low, uneven. Somewhere inside, voices murmured, men who thought the night protected them. Rachel crouched, shifting her pack into position, moving low through weeds and dirt. The shadows embraced her. She became part of them, her steps silent, her breathing measured. The man in the suit stayed behind, as they always did. Commanders watched. Operatives acted. The distance between them was more than meters. It was life itself. Rachel slipped along the outer wall of the first structure. Her gloved hand brushed brick as she leaned in, scanning angles, studying light. She didn't rush. She never rushed. Patience had always been her weapon. A figure moved in a lit window. She froze. The silhouette leaned on a table, head bent, cigarette smoke curling upward. He laughed at something unseen. Rachel waited, counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. She eased forward only when he turned his back. Her boots made no sound on the dirt as she moved toward the second structure. Inside, more voices. Louder. Two men arguing over supplies, their tones sharp, impatient. She heard the scrape of metal, the slam of a crate. Their words were muffled by distance, but their frustration was clear. Rachel slid into a shadowed corner, crouching low. She unslung her rifle and rested it against her knee, scope angled toward the faint light spilling through the broken windows. Her breathing slowed again, heart steady. She wasn't nervous. Nerves had left her years ago. What she carried now wasn't fear, it was something heavier. Resignation. She whispered to herself, so soft it was lost in the night. Peace doesn't last. Through the scope she saw the first target. Broad shoulders, cropped hair, packing across the room. He gestured violently, barking orders at the second man. Papers littered the table. Weapons stacked in the corner. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a hub. Her finger brushed the trigger lightly. She adjusted her aim, exhaled. The world narrowed to a circle of glass and crosshairs. And then movement. A child. Rachel's breath caught. A boy no older than 10 slipped into the room from a side door. Barefoot, small, his eyes wide, uncertain. He stood near the corner, silent, unseen by the two men still arguing. Rachel's scope hovered. Her chest tightened. The man in the suit's words echoed. Collateral doesn't exist if you do your job. But collateral wasn't theory. Collateral had eyes. Collateral had breath. Collateral was a boy holding onto the edge of a table, staring at men who wouldn't notice him until it was too late. Rachel's finger stilled. Her silence deepened. She shifted the scope away from the boy, back to the packing man. She could take the shot. Clean, fast, precise. But the sound, the chaos that would follow, the boy wouldn't survive it. She lowered the rifle, slowly, carefully. She leaned back against the wall, heart steady but heavier now. Her hand touched the casing in her pocket, the unfired bullet, a reminder that sometimes not shooting was harder than pulling the trigger. Rachel waited, listened, watched. Minutes passed. The boy slipped out again, vanishing into the night. Only then did she raise the scope once more. Her breath slowed, her pulse aligned with the rhythm of silence. One squeeze, a muffled crack. The packing man dropped instantly, body folding without sound. The second target froze, spinning toward the sound. Panic widened his eyes. Rachel shifted. Another squeeze. The room fell silent. Two shots, two men. no collateral. Rachel exhaled, not relief, not triumph, just air leaving lungs. She slung the rifle, pulled her pack close, and melted back into the night. Her boots left no trace. Her presence left no mark. From the shadows near the SUV, the man in the suit stepped forward. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. He had heard. He had seen the flicker of light from the windows. He nodded once, efficient. Rachel adjusted the strap on her pack. It was messy. He tilted his head, uncomprehending. 2 shots, 2 confirmed, that's not messy. Rachel's eyes narrowed, but she didn't answer. He would never understand what messy meant. Messy wasn't blood on the floor. Messy was the silence of a child's eyes watching men argue over weapons. Messy was the decision to lower a rifle, even for seconds, and risk everything. She climbed into the SUV. The man followed. The driver started the engine. The vehicle turned away from the compound, headlights slicing the night once more. Rachel leaned back, eyes closed, scar pressing against her glove. She whispered words only the dark could hear. Every shot costs more than the trigger pull. The man in the suit didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had his report. He had his numbers. Rachel had the silence, and the silence would follow her long after the mission ended. Because for soldiers like her, the world measured success in bodies, but she measured it in scars. Why does the silence feel heavier after the shot? The SUV glided back through the night, headlights tunneling across empty roads. Inside, no one spoke. The driver kept his eyes locked forward. The man in the black suit sat across from Rachel, posture perfect, his face unreadable. Rachel leaned against the window, the cold glass pressing into her temple. Her eyes were closed but not asleep. She never slept after a mission. Sleep was for men who believed things ended when the report was filed. For her, missions lived on. They lodged themselves in memory, replayed in fragments. The boy's eyes, wide in the shadows, would return again and again. Her scar burned faintly. She flexed her hand against her thigh as though pressing the ache away. It didn't work. The man in the suit finally broke the silence. 2 confirmed, no collateral. His voice was even, clipped, rehearsed. The operation is a success. Rachel's lips curved faintly, but it wasn't a smile. It was closer to grief. Success, is that what you call it? The man adjusted his tie. What else should I call it? Rachel opened her eyes. They locked onto him. Brown, steady, tired. You weren't inside. You didn't see the boy. For the first time, a pause in his polished composure. His fingers stilled against his knee. Collateral. She cut him off, voice sharper now. Collateral doesn't exist, right? That's what you said. The words hung between them, heavy, unblinking. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He only looked away toward the dark window. You made the right call. That's what matters. Rachel leaned back again, exhaling slowly. Her silence said more than any argument could. By the time they reached the underground facility, the clock had pushed toward dawn. Pale light cracked along the horizon. The SUV rolled to a stop inside the concrete garage. Rachel slid out, her boots echoing against the floor. They walked down the corridor together, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. At the briefing room, the man in the suit stopped, gesturing toward the door. Command is waiting. Rachel adjusted the strap on her backpack, lifted her rifle, and stepped inside. The room was small, bare. A single table, a screen mounted on the wall. 3 figures sat across from her, faceless men in pressed uniforms, their insignia gleaming under the sterile lights. They didn't look at her the way the crowd in the gun shop had. Their eyes weren't mocking. They were colder than that, assessing, measuring. One of them spoke first. His voice was gravel, ground down by years of decisions that never touched his own hands. 2 targets, eliminated, confirmed. Rachel said nothing. She set the rifle on the table, barrel angled away, her hands steady. Another man leaned forward, tapping a pen against his file. Efficient, he said, minimal disruption. Rachel's gaze flicked to him. There was a child. The pen stilled, the man didn't flinch, and her jaw tightened, and he was in the room. The first man shifted slightly, exchanging a glance with the second. But he's not in the report. Rachel's voice was quieter now but sharper. Reports don't bleed. Reports don't grow up with scars. The third man, silent until now, finally spoke. His tone was colder than the others. You're not here to moralize, Ghost 17. You're here to execute. Rachel's eyes locked on him. And when the executing is done, who carries it? The room went still. The men exchanged looks, irritation, calculation. The man in the suit, standing by the wall, adjusted his glasses but said nothing. Finally, the first man closed the file in front of him. The mission is complete. That's all that matters. Rachel stood. She didn't salute. She didn't acknowledge them. She simply lifted her backpack, slung it over her shoulder, and left. The corridor outside stretched long and cold. Her boots echoed too loudly in the silence. The man in the suit caught up, his voice low. You shouldn't antagonize them. Rachel didn't slow her pace. I didn't antagonize, I told the truth. His jaw tightened. Truth doesn't keep you alive in this line of work. Rachel stopped, turned, her eyes locked on his, steady, unflinching. Neither does silence. For a moment, neither moved. Then she walked on, leaving him behind. Her quarters were the same concrete walls, the same cracked mirror, the same thin bed that didn't remember warmth. She sat on the edge, her backpack on her lap. She unzipped it slowly, pulling out the cloth. She unfolded it, staring at the faint stain, her thumb brushing over it like a ritual. The boy's eyes returned, wide, silent. She hadn't failed him, not yet, but she knew what it meant that he existed in that place. She knew what it meant that he had seen her. Her scar burned again. She pressed the cloth to her hand, closing her eyes. Memories bled through. The laughter at the gun shop. The silence after the coin split. The mountain winds at Sun La Peak. The smell of gunpowder still clinging to her gloves. Her breath caught. For a moment she wished the cloth could erase it all, but it never did. A knock sounded at the door. Rachel didn't answer. The knock came again, firmer. She set the cloth aside, rose, and opened it. The gunsmith stood there, his glasses fogged from the morning chill. His hands, still stained with oil, clutched something small. I thought you might want this, he said quietly. He held out the other half of the coin, the one that had split at the range. Rachel stared at it, didn't reach for it. The old man's voice softened. I've seen shooters my whole life, but I've never seen silence like yours. People need to be reminded of that, even me. Rachel finally extended her hand, the scar pale against her glove. She took the coin, held it between her fingers, and nodded once. No words. The gunsmith adjusted his glasses, his voice low. They'll write their reports, they'll call it clean, but I know better. You always leave with more than they admit. Rachel's throat tightened. She pocketed the coin, her voice just above a whisper, and less than I can explain. The gunsmith studied her for a moment longer, then turned and walked down the hall. His steps faded. The silence returned. Rachel sat back on the bed. Her hand brushed the scar again, the coin heavy in her pocket now. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, her head bowed. She whispered, not to the room, not even to herself, but to the silence. One day peace will come. One day, but not yet. Because some battles don't end when the mission does. They end when the silence finally breaks. How did you leave when you were never really there? Rachel moved through the corridors of the underground facility one last time, boots steady, pack slung, rifle tucked close. No one stopped her. No one asked questions. That was the way it always was. Ghosts weren't dismissed, they just faded. She pushed through the final steel door and stepped into dawn. The horizon burned faint orange, shadows stretching across gravel and rusting fences. The air was sharp, clean, and cold. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs, then exhaled slowly, like it might be the last time she could taste air without gunpowder laced in it. The black SUV idled nearby. The man in the suit waited beside it, hands folded neatly in front of him. He looked at her the way he always did, precise, unreadable, professional. "Transport is ready," he said. Rachel stopped short of him, her eyes lifted, catching the rising sun. For a moment its light glinted across her scar, a pale arrow flashing before fading again. She shook her head. "No transport," she said softly. The man blinked once behind his dark lenses. "You have no orders without transport." Rachel adjusted the strap of her backpack. "Then I have no orders." The words fell into the silence like stones dropped into deep water. He stared at her, but she didn't flinch. Finally, he gave the smallest nod. He knew better than to push. Ghosts were many things, but controllable was not one of them. Rachel turned and walked past him, not toward the SUV, not toward the road, toward the open horizon. Gravel crunched beneath her boots, steady, deliberate. She didn't look back. Behind her, the man in the suit raised a hand to his chest, subtle, almost reverent. The ghost viper salute. He lowered it slowly, then climbed into the SUV. The engine started. By the time he glanced once more toward the horizon, she was already gone. Rachel walked until the facility disappeared behind her. The land opened wide, empty fields and long roads stretching into silence. She kept her pace even, her breath steady. The coin sat heavy in her pocket, pressing against her leg with each step. Her mind replayed the boy's eyes, the scar on her hand, the laughter in the gun shop, the silence after the coin split. Threads of memory woven together into something she couldn't name. Something larger than missions, larger than reports. At a crossroads where asphalt cracked under weeds, she stopped. She pulled the coin from her pocket, held it in the dawn light. One half, a piece of something broken. She turned it in her hand, studying its jagged edge. It would never be whole again, but it still caught the light. Her breath trembled for the first time in years. She whispered to the coin, though she knew it would never answer. "I can't be whole either, but maybe I can still reflect something." She closed her fist around it, tucked it back into her pocket, and kept walking. The world around her began to wake. A truck rumbled down a distant road. Birds called faintly from somewhere unseen. Smoke curled from chimneys of houses that hadn't been marked on maps. Life went on, ordinary, fragile, untouched by the silence she carried. Rachel envied them, not with bitterness but with something softer, a longing. She imagined, for a brief moment, what it would feel like to sit at a kitchen table with steam rising from a chipped mug of coffee, instead of briefing tables stacked with files. She imagined hearing laughter that wasn't cruel, wasn't mocking, but genuine. She imagined her scar meaning nothing more than a childhood scrape. The images flickered, then faded. They always did. By midday she had reached a small town, ordinary streets, children chasing a ball across cracked pavement, a man unlocking his shop, flipping the sign from closed to open, a woman walking her dog, leash tangled around her wrist. Rachel blended in, she always did. No one looked twice at the worn windbreaker, the frayed backpack, the sneakers with peeling soles. She was invisible in plain sight. That was her strength. That was her curse. She stopped at a cafe, bought a cup of black coffee with cash, and sat by the window. The steam rose. She wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat soak into her scarred knuckles. For a moment, just a moment, she let herself breathe as though she belonged. But even in that stillness, she knew the truth. Missions didn't end when the shots stopped. They lingered, they waited, they whispered. Peace wasn't a place she could stay. It was a pause between storms. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She didn't check it. She didn't need to. She knew what it was. Another set of coordinates, another file, another silence waiting to be filled. She sipped her coffee, eyes fixed on the street outside. A boy ran past, laughing, breathless, chasing after the ball. Her chest tightened. Her grip on the cup trembled. She forced her breath steady again, whispering to herself. Not tonight. Tonight I sit. Tonight I breathe. The boy disappeared around the corner. Rachel set the cup down, pressed her palm against her scar, and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope, not for freedom, not for absolution, just for one more day of pause before the next storm came. Because sometimes dignity doesn't shout. Sometimes it doesn't argue, doesn't explain, doesn't demand to be seen. Sometimes dignity is silence. A silence that endures, even when the world laughs. A silence that acts when words are wasted. And sometimes, silence is the loudest salute of all.